When an avoidant starts to feel something real, something deep, raw, and undeniable, their instinct isn't to move toward it, it's to retreat. Most people misinterpret this. They see distance and assume disinterest. They see coldness and assume rejection. But here's the truth. Avoidants push away what they fear losing the most, and the moment they begin to truly love you is often the moment they start pulling back hardest. Now let's get this straight. This isn't about games or manipulation. This is about survival, emotional survival. Avoidant attachment is rooted in early wiring, often formed in childhood environments where vulnerability wasn't safe, love wasn't consistent, or emotional needs were dismissed or punished. They learned that closeness was a risk, not a reward. So they grew up armored, and every time intimacy knocks at their door, their nervous system goes into lockdown. Think about it. If your deepest emotional wounds are linked to abandonment, engulfment, or rejection, what happens when someone suddenly shows up and loves you fully? It triggers those wounds. It doesn't heal them immediately. It activates the alarm. That alarm says this person could hurt you. This connection could destroy you. Run before they get too close. Run before they see the parts of you spent your whole life hiding. So what looks like indifference might actually be terror. Not terror of you, but of the emotional intensity you represent. Because you don't just show up, you awaken something in them. You represent safety and danger, love and risk, and most of all, you represent loss. Because for someone who's never truly believed they're lovable, the moment they find someone who genuinely sees them, who truly gets them, they start counting the days until they lose it all. That's why avoidants push away. That's why they withdraw when it starts to feel real. It's not a reflection of your value. It's a reflection of their fear of depending, their fear of needing, their fear of being seen and then abandoned, rejected, or worse, accepted, and then watched as you slowly drift away. And here's the paradox. The more they love you, the more threatening you become to their carefully managed inner world. You might think love heals, and it can, but only when the person is ready to receive it. Until then, your presence, your availability, your emotional consistency, it doesn't feel comforting to them. It feels invasive. It feels like a spotlight on every part of themselves they've been trained to hide. This is where so many people make the mistake of taking the avoidance withdrawal personally. They internalize it. They assume they did something wrong. But you have to understand, you didn't break them. You just touched a wound that's never been healed. And that wound is deep. That wound is old. And until they face it, until they recognize it, you'll always feel like you're chasing someone who's running from their own heart. Now, am I saying you should tolerate emotional abandonment? No. This is not about martyrdom. It's not about waiting endlessly for someone to figure it out while you shrink and suffer. But it is about awareness. Because awareness gives you power. It allows you to see that their behavior isn't necessarily about a lack of love, it's about a lack of capacity. And that distinction changes everything. When you realize that pushing away might actually be an unconscious declaration of how deeply you matter to them, you stop playing the victim of their detachment. You stop chasing validation. You stop begging for clarity from someone who doesn't even have clarity within themselves. And instead, you choose self-respect with understanding. Compassion with boundaries. Avoidants are not heartless. They are heart-guarded. And in their world, the act of pushing you away is not always an exit. It's often a silent, terrified cry for time, for space, for safety. You are not the problem. You might just be the first real connection they've ever had. And maybe, just maybe, your absence will do what your presence could never do. Force them to finally face the part of themselves they've been running from. Because sometimes when an avoidant pushes you away, it's not because they don't love you. It's because they love you more than they know how to handle. Here's the part that most people don't understand. And it's the reason they end up walking away confused, heartbroken, and questioning their worth. When an avoidant pulls back, when they stop texting, go silent, cancel plans, or suddenly act cold, it's not always because they want out. In fact, the more intense the silence, the more likely something else is happening, something deeper, something unspoken, because sometimes that emotional distance, that frustrating withdrawal is not a rejection. It's a subconscious test, a silent scream. Will you still care if I make it hard to love me? Avoidants don't know how to say, I need you. That's not in their emotional vocabulary. Needing someone feels like weakness. It feels like danger. It feels like giving someone else power they swore they'd never hand over. So instead of reaching out, they pull away. Instead of asking for closeness, they create distance. But don't be fooled. That behavior is rarely about apathy. It's often a camouflage for a hidden plea. Don't give up on me. Don't confirm my deepest fear that everyone eventually leaves. This is where people get stuck in emotional confusion. Because how can someone long for connection and simultaneously run from it? How can someone crave closeness but create space the moment they feel it? The answer is simple but not easy. Fear and conditioning. Avoidants are wired to expect pain where there should be love, to expect suffocation where there should be intimacy. Their nervous systems are built on defense, not trust. So closeness, even when it's beautiful, feels dangerous. And here's the paradox. The more they care about you, the more threatening you become. You see, you're not just a person to them. You're not just a partner or a friend. You're a mirror. And when they see themselves through your love, your acceptance, your consistency, your emotional availability, it shines a light on all the parts they've been trying to hide, the parts they feel aren't good enough, the parts they fear would make you leave if you really saw them. So what do? They test you, not consciously, not manipulatively, but deeply, instinctively. They create space to see if you'll fill it. They become difficult, distant, detached, not because they want to push you away permanently, but because they're terrified you'll abandon them if they get too close. So they abandon first. They control the rejection before it can control them. It's like an emotional booby trap. If you pull away because they pull away, it confirms their belief. See, I knew it. No one stays. But if you chase them too hard, it suffocates them and triggers their fear of engulfment. That's the paradox of avoidant love. The push-pull isn't a game. It's a cycle born of trauma and fear. And unless you understand it, you will always take it personally. You will always believe their silence is your failure instead of their wound bleeding onto you. But let me be clear, this does not mean you're responsible for fixing them. You're not their therapist. You are not the medicine to their dysfunction. However, awareness gives you power. When you can interpret their emotional language accurately, you stop making their actions about your inadequacy. You stop over-explaining, over-apologizing, or abandoning your self-worth to get a response. But here's what this means in practice. When an avoidant pulls back, the most powerful thing you can do is hold your ground with compassion. Don't chase, don't collapse, don't beg, but also don't punish, don't play mind games, don't retaliate. Your calm, grounded presence is the very thing their nervous system has never known and the very thing it desperately needs. Not pressure, not performance, but presence. This is the hard truth. Their distance is not always distance from you, it's distance from themselves. You just happen to be close enough to feel it. And sometimes when they're quiet, it's not that they're done with you, it's that they're drowning in emotions they've never been taught how to swim in. And your reaction in those moments, that's what teaches them what love really looks like. But remember, you cannot carry a connection alone. There's a difference between patience and self-abandonment. If you find yourself constantly proving your worth to someone who's unsure if they can even love at all, it's time to pause. Not because they're unworthy of love, but because you are. And your emotional oxygen matters too. So the next time you feel the sting of their silence or the coldness of their pullback, pause, breathe, and ask yourself, is this a rejection or a reflection of someone who's never felt safe enough to love fully? Because sometimes the ones who push you away the hardest are the ones who love you the most and fear it even more. It's one of the most confusing dynamics in relationships. The deeper the emotional connection grows, the more an avoidant starts to retreat. You think that more intimacy would lead to more closeness, more warmth, more vulnerability. But in the world of an avoidant, often works in reverse. The deeper it gets, the sharper the withdrawal. On the surface, this looks like emotional sabotage, and let's be honest, it is. But it's not sabotage of the relationship as much as it is a defense against internal chaos. Because here's the truth most people miss. Avoidants don't fear love that stays on the surface. They fear the kind of love that demands presence, exposure, and emotional availability. When things are light and casual, they're engaged. They can be playful, attentive, even romantic. But when the connection starts to matter, when it touches something deeper, they start to feel a kind of panic, a panic that says, this is too much. I don't know who I am in this. I don't know how to hold this without losing myself. That's when they disappear. That's when they start to need space. That's when you feel the temperature drop overnight. And what's so heartbreaking is that this happens right at the moment when the relationship is entering a more meaningful, more transformative stage. But you have to understand what's happening behind the scenes. Deep love doesn't just activate desire for an avoidant. It activates fear. And not fear of the other person, fear of themselves. Because suddenly, they can't just operate on logic and routine anymore. Suddenly, they're being asked without words to feel, to show up emotionally, to engage with vulnerability, and that terrifies them. Why? Because vulnerability means surrendering the illusion of control. It means allowing someone else to see your emotional reality, your insecurities, your needs, your history, your wounds. And avoidants have spent their entire lives building fortresses around that reality. They've survived by not needing anyone, by staying self-sufficient, by pretending that connection is optional. But deep love destroys that illusion. It threatens the very identity they've constructed to feel safe in this world. So what do? They retreat. They create distance, not because they want the love to end, but because the love feels too powerful, too overwhelming, too exposing. The irony is that the closer they feel to you, the more dangerous the connection feels to their nervous system. And this isn't just emotional, it's physiological. Their body literally goes into threat mode. The same way someone might flinch from physical danger, the avoidant flinches from emotional intimacy. And here's what's even more paradoxical. Their withdrawal often has nothing to do with you. You didn't say the wrong thing. You didn't come on too strong. In fact, what you probably did was exactly what a healthy, available partner should do. You showed up. You loved with openness. You leaned in. But to them, that feels like pressure, like invasion, like a storm coming to tear down the walls they've spent decades building. So if you're in a connection with an avoidant and things were going well, really well, and then suddenly it all shifts, you need to understand this. It's not always a sign the love is fading. Sometimes it's a sign that it's growing too fast for them to regulate. Sometimes that distance you're feeling is not the end. It's their attempt to breathe, to process, to find safety in the only way they know how, solitude. But here's where it gets tricky. If you chase them, you validate their fear of being overwhelmed. If you get angry and punish them, you reinforce their belief that intimacy leads to emotional pain. But if you abandon yourself and wait endlessly, you lose your own power and value. So what's the answer? Hold the tension. Hold yourself. Stay grounded. Recognize the pattern for what it is. Not a reflection of your worth, but a reflection of their wiring. And decide with clarity what you will and will not tolerate. This isn't about waiting forever for someone to grow up emotionally. It's about recognizing that love doesn't always look like we expect. Sometimes it comes in through the back door, dressed in fear, avoidance, and silence. But if you can see the intention behind the behavior, you stop reacting to the surface. You start responding with wisdom. And here's the truth to take with you. When an avoidant pulls away at the peak of connection, it's often not the beginning of the end. It's the beginning of everything they've been terrified to feel. It's not distance from love. It's a crash course in learning how to hold it. So instead of asking, why are they leaving? Ask, what just got too real for them to stay? And that one shift can change everything. Let's challenge one of the biggest misconceptions about avoidance, the idea that when they disappear, they're at peace, that they've moved on, that their silence is confirmation of detachment. But the truth is far more complex and in many cases far more painful. When an avoidant goes quiet, they're not always calm, they're in chaos. Not externally, not always visibly, but internally. Emotionally, psychologically. Their disappearing act is often not a sign of indifference, it's a sign of overwhelm. It's a response to a tidal wave of emotion they were never taught to process. You see, most avoidantly attached individuals aren't disconnected because they don't have feelings. They're disconnected because they don't know how to handle them. There's a massive difference. They've built an emotional system on shutdown, on detachment, on isolation. Not because they want to hurt others, but because for them, that was how they survived connection that felt unstable, conditional, or dangerous early in life. So when love enters their life, real deep, heart-wrenching love, it doesn't feel like a gift. It feels like a threat. It throws off the internal structure they've used to stay safe. Don't feel too much. Don't get too close. Don't need anyone. And when those beliefs get challenged by someone who sees them, someone who brings consistent emotional presence, their system scrambles. That's when they retreat. That's when they disappear. Not because they don't care, but because they don't trust themselves to manage what they're feeling. They're not ghosting you to punish you. They're pulling away to avoid the emotional intensity inside their own mind. But here's the tragedy. What you experience on your side is rejection, abandonment, even betrayal. You see them go silent and assume you've been discarded. And that assumption creates pain. It creates spiraling thoughts. But you're not seeing what's happening inside them. What's happening is a mental breakdown that's being hidden behind a mask of silence. They're overthinking everything, what they feel for you, what it means, whether they're capable of holding this love, and worst of all, what will happen if they fail. Their inner voice isn't saying, I don't care about this. It's screaming, what if I lose them? What if I ruin this? What if they get too close and see the parts of me I've been running from my whole life? This internal breakdown often doesn't look dramatic. Avoidants are masters of control. Even when they're falling apart inside, they may appear cold, logical, or distant. But make no mistake, that's not strength. That's a shutdown. That's a coping mechanism. They might be scrolling through their phone, acting fine, avoiding all conversation, but inside they're emotionally imploding. They're stuck between a craving for connection and a terror of intimacy, between wanting to hold you and fearing you'll slip through their fingers, or worse, stay and make them confront everything they've buried. And this is where people in relationships with avoidance often get stuck. Because what do you do when the person who wants you also runs from you? When their actions contradict their emotions? You try and make sense of it. You try to pull answers out of them. You ask questions they can't emotionally answer yet. But you need to understand their silence is not clarity, it's confusion. Their withdrawal isn't resolution, it's paralysis. They're not at peace. They're in survival mode. Now, does this mean you sit around and tolerate emotional shutdown? No. But it does mean you shift your perspective. You stop internalizing their behavior as a reflection of your worth. You stop assuming their distance means you failed. You start seeing that sometimes love triggers deep, unresolved trauma in the one who receives it. And if they're not ready to face that trauma, they will retreat, not because you're wrong for them, but because you're the first thing that ever felt right. Here's the uncomfortable reality. When they go silent, it's often not about you at all. It's about everything they've never said, everything they've never faced, and everything they've never allowed themselves to feel until you showed up. So don't confuse distance with emotional clarity. Sometimes the greatest emotional turmoil is disguised as detachment. Sometimes the storm is quiet, and sometimes the loudest breakdown is happening in silence. And that's where your power lies. Not in fixing them, not in chasing them, but in seeing clearly, in standing firm in your truth while understanding theirs, in refusing to make someone's emotional paralysis your prison, because love that's hidden in silence is still love, but it can't grow in the dark. Let them face their inner war, but never forget your peace isn't negotiable. Avoidants aren't afraid of you. They're afraid of what you represent. You see? You're not just a partner to them. You're a mirror, a reflection of something they've spent their whole life pretending they didn't need. Connection. Deep, emotional, soul-level connection. And when you show up with open arms, a soft heart, and consistent presence, it shakes them, not because it's wrong, but because it threatens the fragile identity they've built, an identity rooted in self-protection, self-reliance, and a belief that needing someone equals weakness. Avoidants didn't come to this belief by accident. They were shaped by environments that made vulnerability unsafe. Environments that taught them if you lean in, you'll be let down. If you show your heart, it will be used against you. So what do? They adapt. They grow up learning to bury their needs, to silence their emotional hunger, to act like independence is the only form of strength. But then someone like you walks in, someone who sees past the walls, someone who gives without taking, listens without judging, and stays without demanding. And that presence, it's disarming. It confronts them with a terrifying possibility. Maybe I do want to be seen. Maybe I do need connection. Maybe I'm not as invincible as I thought. And that possibility doesn't feel like liberation to them. It feels like collapse. Because now they're facing an internal war. A war between who they've always been and who they might become if they actually let you in. And that shift threatens the foundation of everything they've built. Suddenly, they're not in control. Suddenly, they care too much. Suddenly, they feel dependent, not in a needy or dysfunctional way, but in a human way, a way they were never taught how to handle. This is where the confusion sets in, because their behavior starts to contradict their feelings. On one hand, they want you. On the other, they're running. On one hand, they imagine a future with you. On the other, they sabotage the present. And the reason is simple. You represent the very thing they swore they'd never need. Authentic, vulnerable, emotional intimacy. And make no mistake, this is why they pull back. Not because you've done something wrong, but because you've done something right. You've shown up. You've offered safety. You've given them a glimpse of something they didn't believe existed, and that glimpse is terrifying. It doesn't just challenge their emotions, it challenges their identity. You're not fighting for their attention. You're fighting against their programming. And here's what's so crucial to understand. When they push you away, it's often not about wanting space. It's about trying to recover control, trying to reestablish emotional distance so that they don't drown in the vulnerability they don't know how to navigate. But deep down, they don't want you to go. They want to know you'll stay, even when they pull, even when they're confusing, even when they're cold. Because they're testing, not you. But the story they've believed their entire life that if they let someone in, they'll lose everything. And that's the heartbreak of it all. Because while they're pushing you away to protect themselves, all they're doing is reinforcing the loneliness they secretly long to escape. So what do? You hold your ground. You recognize that you're not the source of their fear, you're the trigger for it. And triggering someone's fear doesn't make you wrong, it means you've touched something real. But that doesn't mean you become a martyr. You don't abandon your emotional needs to accommodate their avoidance. What you do is stop personalizing their patterns. You stop trying to earn love that's being buried under fear. You let your presence be powerful, but you let your boundaries speak even louder. Because at the end of the day, the avoidant has to make a decision to continue surviving in isolation or to risk becoming someone new, someone connected, someone present, someone capable of giving and receiving love. You can't make that choice for them. But what you can do is understand the battlefield. You can recognize that their withdrawal is not apathy, it's fear. Their silence is not rejection, it's protection. And their resistance might be the deepest sign that you actually matter. Because the more they push, the more you awaken something inside of them, not just emotion, hope. And sometimes hope is the scariest feeling of all. So if you take nothing else from this, take this. When someone is terrified of needing you, it's not because you're too much. It's because you might be everything they never thought they'd find. We've been taught to read love through actions that look obvious, words of affirmation, public displays, consistent affection. We've been told that when someone loves you, they move toward you. They speak it, they show it, they pursue it. But the truth is, not everyone speaks love in a way that's recognizable, especially not someone with an avoidant attachment style. For them, love isn't loud. It's hidden, and often it doesn't look like closeness, it looks like distance. Withdrawal. Silence. But that silence doesn't always mean they're done. Sometimes it means they're thinking. Sometimes distance isn't a door closing, it's a form of protection. Their way of processing something that's too big, too real, too emotionally overwhelming to face in the moment. See, when an avoidant pulls back, they're not always walking away from the relationship. They're walking into themselves, trying to figure out how to hold a love that's now threatening to break their emotional operating system. You might think their behavior is cold, you might think it's careless, but in many cases what's happening behind the scenes is the exact opposite. They're not in denial of the connection, they're consumed by it, silently, internally. Their head is racing, their heart is flooded. But their instinct isn't to run toward comfort, it's to isolate, to retreat into the one place they've always felt safe. Emotional solitude. This is where things get tricky. Because if you've been open, expressive, vulnerable, this retreat can feel like the ultimate betrayal. You showed up fully, and now they're gone. You gave everything, and now you're left in the silence. And you start to question everything. But here's the key. Avoidants don't retreat because love is absent. They retreat because love is present. And it's activating a level of vulnerability they don't yet know how to carry. And what makes it even more painful is that they won't tell you this. They won't explain it. Why? Because they don't even understand it themselves. They don't have the language for it. All they know is that something inside them feels exposed, and their emotional instincts kick in, like a survival reflex. Pull away, create distance, regain control. But this doesn't mean they've let go. It doesn't mean they've stopped loving you. In fact, some of the most intense avoidant shutdowns happen right after they've felt something profound, a moment of closeness, a powerful conversation, a glimpse of real emotional intimacy. And instead of leaning into it, they hit the brakes. Not because it didn't matter, but because it mattered too much. Their withdrawal is often a delayed emotional response. It's them retreating into a space where they can try to regulate what they're feeling without the pressure of being seen. But here's what you need to hear. Just because they're silent doesn't mean their mind isn't loud with thoughts of you. Just because they've gone distant doesn't mean you've disappeared from their heart. You might be gone physically, but emotionally, you're echoing in every corner of their mind. The avoidant often loves the deepest when they appear the most disconnected, because connection doesn't feel safe to them. It feels like chaos. And their version of coping is isolation. But isolation doesn't cancel out care. It doesn't erase emotional bonds. It just shows the limit of their capacity. Now, that's not a romantic excuse to wait indefinitely. That's not a green light to suffer in silence or tolerate emotional neglect. But it is a reminder that love doesn't always speak the language we expect. And in the case of an avoidant, it often comes cloaked in confusion, silence, and withdrawal. What matters most is what you do with that. Because while they may need space to process, you need clarity to protect your peace. You don't have to decode every action or wait for them to come around, but you can hold space for the possibility that the distance isn't a sign of the end. It's the beginning of something unfamiliar and terrifying for them. Sometimes distance is how love tries to survive before it learns how to stay. So the next time an avoidant pulls back, don't just ask yourself what they're running from. Ask what they're feeling too deeply to face. Because that might be the very place where their love for you lives. And maybe, just maybe, the silence is not them letting go. It's them holding on the only way they know how.